Once goods clear customs, most people think the hard part is over. Compliance is done. The paperwork is finished. But that's not the real question. The real question is, where's your inventory now and how flexible is it? Once inventory clears customs, most people think the hard part is over. From a fulfillment perspective, it's just starting. Because now timing decisions turn into cost decisions. Inbound timing controls how inventory enters the system. Not just when it arrives, but how evenly it arrives. Fulfillment systems are built for flow. Uneven arrival breaks flow. Two brands can move the same volume. One receives inventory in stable batches. The other receives it in spikes. On paper, total volume is identical. In fulfillment, cost outcomes are not. Inbound spikes force defensive labor planning. Warehouses staff for peaks, not averages. That means overtime. Overtime isn't just expensive. It increases error rates. And errors create more downstream work. Uneven inbound creates partial availability. Some SKUs are sellable, others aren't. That pushes the system into exception mode. Orders no longer flow cleanly. Partial availability leads to split fulfillment. Split fulfillment duplicates work. You pick twice. You pack twice. You ship twice. None of this shows up as an inbound problem. It shows up as higher fulfillment cost per order. Inventory positioning adds another layer. Where inventory is placed determines how flexible the system is. Distributed inventory reduces transit distance, but it increases coordination complexity. Concentrated inventory simplifies control, but it increases shipping distance. Positioning decisions determine whether the system absorbs variability or amplifies it. When inventory is shallow and spread out, stockouts happen faster. Rebalancing creates extra movement. Extra movement creates cost. Timing also affects inventory velocity. Delayed or uneven inbound slows turnover. Slow turnover increases holding cost. That cost doesn't feel operational. It feels financial, but it's still fulfillment driven. This is why fulfillment cost often feels unstable after launches. Volume didn't explode, rates didn't change. But timing variability crossed a threshold. Once that happens, the system stops flowing and starts reacting. Once inventory arrives unevenly and is positioned imperfectly, the next cost surface appears immediately. Receiving, where the system either stabilizes or starts correcting. Inbound and positioning decide how much correction work receiving has to do. If inputs are clean, receiving is fast. If inputs are uneven, receiving becomes the bottleneck. That's where fulfillment cost turns visible again. Up to this point, most of the cost we've talked about has been hidden, defined upstream, amplified by timing. Receiving is where fulfillment cost finally becomes visible. In theory, receiving is simple. Scan, count, put away. In practice, receiving reflects every upstream decision. When inputs are clean, receiving is fast. When inputs are unstable, receiving becomes correction work. This is where SKU structure and packaging show their real cost. Mixed cartons, inconsistent labeling, batch-to-batch variation. None of these stop fulfillment. They slow it down. And slowdown is labor. Every receiving exception creates a decision. Is this inventory sellable? Does it match the system record? Does it need rework? Those decisions take time. Time that repeats every time inventory turns. Correction work is slower than execution. Relabeling, repacking, recounting. You're not paying to receive inventory. You're paying to stabilize it. Put away is where receiving decisions lock in long-term cost. Poorly defined units get placed wherever space exists. That makes them harder to retrieve later. Every extra meter walked is a future cost. When receiving is rushed or corrective, slotting quality drops. High-velocity items don't get optimal locations. That inefficiency repeats across every pick. Receiving instability also affects labor planning. Warehouses staff defensively. They assume exceptions. That means more headcount or overtime. And that cost gets baked into fulfillment. Slow receiving delays inventory availability. That pushes the system into partial fulfillment. Orders split. Shipping duplicates. Customer communication increases. This is where fulfillment cost spikes without any rate change. No new carrier. No new warehouse. Just receiving variability crossing a threshold. Once that happens, the system switches modes. Receiving doesn't exist in isolation. It directly shapes how picking behaves. Clean receiving creates flow. Corrective receiving creates friction. Once inventory is in the wrong place, every order pays the price. That's the next stage: picking and order structure. Up to this point, cost has been shaped by structure and timing. Picking is where that structure turns into per order cost. Every order now pays for the decisions made earlier. On paper, both are just orders. In fulfillment, they behave very differently. Order structure determines how much work is required, not volume. Every additional SKU in an order extends the pick path. More walking, more scanning, more chances for error. Seconds per order don't feel expensive until you multiply them by every order. Order complexity also increases error probability. More items mean more decision points. More decision points mean more corrections. Correction work doesn't replace picking, it stacks on top of it. Partial availability turns one order into multiple workflows. You don't pick once, you pick again later. Same order, duplicated effort. This isn't an exception. It's the expected outcome of fragmented inventory. Fulfillment systems rely on batching to stay efficient. Order complexity breaks batching. Orders that don't fit the wave get handled manually. Manual handling is slower, and slower repeats. Picking doesn't end at the shelf. Order structure also shapes packing. More items, more size variation, more box decisions. Hesitation adds time. Once an order splits, work multiplies. 2 picks, 2 packs, 2 outbound scans. Per order cost isn't linear anymore. Split orders don't just affect operations. They increase customer communication. More tracking numbers. More "where's my order" tickets. That labor cost sits outside the warehouse. This is why two brands shipping the same volume can see very different costs. Not because one warehouse is better, because one order profile is simpler. Simplicity scales. Complexity multiplies. By the time an order reaches shipping, most of the work is already done. Shipping doesn't create this cost. It exposes it. This is why shipping feels expensive. Because it's the first place cost becomes obvious. That's the next chapter. This is the point where most people think fulfillment cost starts. Shipping. Because this is where the bill finally shows up. But shipping doesn't create most fulfillment costs. It reveals them. Shipping is the most visible cost. It's itemized. It's easy to read. It looks concrete. So when costs feel high, shipping becomes the obvious suspect. That's a mistake. Shipping cost is highly sensitive to one thing: how many packages you ship per order, not how good your rates are. One order, one box is linear. One order, 2 boxes is not. By the time an order splits, shipping has no choice. The work was already duplicated. Shipping is just executing the outcome. Blaming carriers here misses the point. Shipping also reflects packaging decisions. Box size, void fill, how tightly items fit. Those decisions were locked earlier. Shipping only prices what it's given. Carriers don't charge based on intent. They charge based on dimensions and weight. If packaging is inefficient, shipping cost increases even if nothing else changes. That's not a rate problem. That's a unit definition problem. Inventory positioning also shows up here. If inventory is far from demand, shipping distance increases. If inventory is shallow, orders get routed inefficiently. Shipping doesn't choose that. The system does. When timing breaks upstream, shipping absorbs the urgency. Faster services get selected, not because they're better, because the system ran out of slack. This is why shipping cost feels volatile, not because rates fluctuate wildly, but because shipping sits at the end of the chain. Every upstream decision converges here. If shipping is where cost becomes obvious, returns are where cost becomes irreversible. That's the final stage. Up to this point, fulfillment cost has mostly been variable. Labor, time, handling. Returns are where cost turns irreversible. A return isn't just a shipment coming back. It's a second fulfillment cycle, but with less information, more uncertainty, and lower margin tolerance. Every returned unit forces a decision. Is it resellable as new? Does it need repackaging? Can it be refurbished? Or is it a write-off? Those decisions take time, and time is labor. SKU and packaging complexity hit hardest here. Simple units are easy to grade. Complex units aren't. More components, more cosmetic variants, more ambiguity. Ambiguity forces manual review. If return rules aren't explicit, humans decide on the floor. Human judgment under time pressure is expensive and inconsistent. That inconsistency shows up as lost value. Packaging determines whether value can be recovered. If packaging is easy to restore, resale is viable. If it isn't, the unit degrades immediately. That degradation is silent. Returned inventory doesn't re-enter the system cleanly. It sits. While decisions are pending, while labor is allocated, while value decays. Returns also consume space. Space that could hold sellable inventory. This increases congestion, which slows everything else down. Returns also spill outside the warehouse. Customer service workload increases. Refund processing, status updates, disputes. Those costs don't sit under fulfillment, but they're caused by it. This is why returns are where margin quietly disappears. Not because returns exist, but because recovery isn't guaranteed. Once a unit comes back, every upstream decision determines how much value survives. Returns are the final convergence point. SKU structure, packaging, inventory positioning, order complexity. Everything shows up here. This is why fulfillment costs feel impossible to fix at the end. By the time returns dominate cost, the system has very little flexibility left. So now we've walked the entire chain, from factory to returns. What's left is to connect the dots, to understand what actually changes when constraints change. At this point, we've walked the entire fulfillment chain, not as a process, but as a system. Now we need to answer one final question. What actually changes when constraints change? Most people think fulfillment cost is about efficiency. It's not. It's about which mode the system operates in, flow mode or exception mode. Constraints decide that. When constraints are loose, complexity spreads. SKU fragments. Packaging varies. Timing becomes uneven. The system adapts. It shifts into exception handling. Exception mode is expensive, not because people are inefficient, but because humans replace automation. Every exception is a manual decision. Manual decisions don't scale. This is why fulfillment cost variance matters more than average cost. High variance forces defensive behavior, more buffer, more overtime, more safety stock. That insurance shows up as cost. Notice what didn't change. The warehouse, the carrier, the people. Only the constraints changed. Yet outcomes look completely different. This is why fixing fulfillment at the end rarely works. By the time cost shows up in shipping or returns, the system has already committed. There's no slack left. Constraints work upstream. They don't optimize execution. They prevent instability from entering the system. That's the difference. When constraints are clear, costs don't disappear. They stabilize. Stability is what allows planning. Planning is what protects margin. Most fulfillment failures aren't execution failures. They're decision failures. Not bad decisions, unconstrained ones. This is why fulfillment cost feels invisible, because it's decided early and revealed late. Fulfillment isn't shipping. It's a system of irreversible decisions. And once you see it that way, the numbers finally make sense.